I'm posting this here because I still don't know where else to put it. HR buried it. Friends say, move on. My boss says it never happened the way I remember it. So here I am, on Reddit, typing this out like I'm confessing to strangers because at least strangers don't gaslight you with a straight face. This story didn't start in the office. That's important. If it had, I might have recognized the warning signs earlier, but it started on a night when everything was already chaos. 3 months ago, there was a storm so violent it shut down half the city. Streets flooded in minutes, power flickered like a dying pulse. I was driving home late because, surprise, I was staying overtime again. Not because I had to, officially. Just because if I didn't, my boss, let's call her Marianne, would sigh loudly in meetings and say things like, "Some people just don't have leadership stamina." You learn quickly what those words mean. On that night, traffic stopped completely. I saw a car half swallowed by water near an underpass. Someone was banging weakly on the window. No one else stopped. People never do during storms. I pulled over without thinking, got soaked in seconds, cut my hands on broken glass trying to get the door open. The man inside was barely conscious. Heavy coat, expensive watch, but none of that mattered. He was just human, scared, breathing badly. I dragged him out with help from another driver, waited until emergency services arrived. He tried to speak, couldn't. I never got his name. By the time the ambulance took him, I was shaking so hard I had to sit on the curb. I went home soaked, bleeding, and strangely calm, like my body had spent all its fear already. The next morning, I went to work like nothing happened. That's kind of the theme of my life, I guess. For context, I've worked at this company for 4 years, mid-level analyst. Good performance reviews until Marianne became my direct boss last year. She's one of those people who weaponizes politeness, smiles while undermining you, compliments you while slowly erasing you from the room. The first red flag was when she asked me to walk her through an idea I'd been developing for months, an efficiency model that could save the department serious money. She nodded, took notes, thanked me. 2 weeks later, she presented my model as her strategic vision. At the time, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. That's what women like me are trained to do in offices like this. Assume innocence. Don't be emotional. Be a team player. The humiliation comes later, when you realize you helped sharpen the knife. After the storm, Marianne's behavior shifted. She became colder, sharper, started correcting me publicly, interrupting me mid-sentence. Once, in front of the whole team, she laughed and said, "Let's let someone more senior explain this. I was the one who built the damn thing. I didn't know yet how bad it would get. I didn't know my name was already being removed from documents, my work reframed as support, my presence in meetings slowly reduced. I didn't know that the stranger from the storm was connected to any of this at all. All I knew was that something felt wrong, like the air before thunder, like standing in water and realizing it's rising. That storm wasn't the disaster. It was the warning. If you've ever been slowly humiliated at work, you know it rarely looks dramatic at first. No shouting, no slammed doors. It looks like an ordinary day where something tiny is off, and then another tiny thing, and by the end of it, you're sitting at your desk wondering why you feel like you've been slapped, but there's no mark on your face. The day it really started was a Tuesday. No storm, no symbolism, just bad coffee and fluorescent lights. I got in early, like always. Marianne loved to say she noticed dedication, even though she never actually acknowledged it unless it benefited her. I had prepared slides for a departmental update. My project, the same efficiency model I'd been refining since before she arrived. I'd sent her the deck the night before, flagged a few key points, even added notes anticipating questions from upper management. At 9:12 a.m., I got a calendar notification I didn't recognize. Strategic alignment, leadership only. Leadership only. That was odd, because this project was my responsibility, and these meetings usually included me. I refreshed my email. Nothing. No explanation. No follow-up. Just silence. I walked past the conference room on my way to the printer. Through the glass, I saw my slides on the screen. Same color scheme. Same charts. Same phrasing I'd agonized over. Marianne was standing at the front, clicking through them confidently, coffee in hand, smiling that calm, professional smile she used when she wanted to look generous. I stopped walking. I watched her say my ideas out loud, watched people nod, watched someone interrupt her with a question I had already solved weeks ago, and watched her answer it using my exact wording. Not paraphrased. Exact. No one looked at me. No one even noticed I was there. 10 minutes later, she came out, laughing with two directors. She saw me then. Her smile didn't falter. "Oh," she said lightly. "Didn't realize you were waiting. That meeting ran long." I said, "I wasn't invited." She blinked. "Once." "Oh? Well, it was high level. We didn't want to overwhelm the room." Overwhelm the room. With me. Before I could respond, she added, "Great groundwork, by the way. Really helpful support." Support. That word landed like a bruise. The rest of the day spiraled fast, like the universe decided to compress every humiliation into 8 hours. My access to a shared folder was suddenly restricted. A junior colleague asked me why my name was removed from the project overview. An email went out praising Marianne for her innovative leadership and original strategic vision. Original. By lunchtime, my hands were shaking. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection, trying to decide if I was overreacting. That's the thing about office humiliation. It's designed to make you doubt your own reality. There's no single punch, just 1,000 small cuts, each one plausible enough to excuse. In the afternoon check-in, Marianne interrupted me 3 times. The 4th time, she smiled and said, "Let's circle back if you have something new to add." Something new, as if the foundation itself wasn't mine. Then came the worst part. At 4:47 p.m., an email hit the whole department. The project was being escalated to the executive level. Final presentation scheduled. Presenter, Marianne. No mention of me. Anywhere. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I felt stupid. Exposed. Like I'd been standing naked in the office for months and only just realized everyone could see me. That night, as I packed up, she stopped by my desk. "Don't take this personally," she said softly, like she was doing me a favor. "Visibility is tricky. You'll get there someday." I nodded, because that's what you do when someone is stealing your work and your voice at the same time. As I left the building, rain started again. Light. Almost polite. Nothing like the storm from before, but I felt the same tightness in my chest. That's when I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate erasure. I didn't confront Marianne right away. I know some people will say that was my mistake, but if you've ever dealt with someone like her, you understand why. She thrived on emotional reactions. She collected them like trophies. Crying, anger, even visible confusion. She used all of it as proof that you were unstable, not her. So I waited 2 days. 2 long, humiliating days where people congratulated her in the hallway for her project, where I was seed instead of addressed, where my role was quietly reduced to note-taker. By the second evening, something inside me went very still. That's usually when I stop being afraid. I asked for a one-on-one meeting. Neutral subject line. Professional tone. No accusations. She accepted within minutes. Her office was exactly what you'd expect. Glass walls, minimalist decor, one framed quote about leadership that she absolutely did not live by. She gestured for me to sit, then deliberately finished typing an email before looking up. Power move number 1. So, she said pleasantly, what's on your mind? I had rehearsed this. Calm, factual, unemotional. I want to talk about the efficiency model, I said. Specifically, my role in developing it and why I was excluded from the leadership meeting. She smiled. Not warmly, politely, like a customer service rep denying a refund. I'm surprised you feel excluded, she replied. You were part of the process. Part of, I repeated. I designed it. I built the framework. The projections are mine. Her smile thinned. That's a very subjective interpretation. There it was. The first lie, delivered smoothly. I have drafts, I said. Emails. Timelines. She waved a hand gently, as if brushing dust from the air. Everyone contributes ideas. That's how teams work. I felt my pulse in my ears but kept my voice steady. Then why was my name removed from the deck? She leaned back in her chair, studied me. Then she sighed, loudly. This is what I was afraid of, she said. You're taking this personally. I almost laughed. Almost. I'm asking for acknowledgement, I said. And inclusion. That's it. Her tone shifted then. Still calm, but colder. Sharper. You need to understand something, she said. At this level, execution matters more than origin. Leadership synthesizes. Junior staff support. Junior staff. I reminded her I was not junior. Same grade, same tenure bracket. She smiled again. On paper, maybe? That one sentence did more damage than any insult, because it told me exactly how she saw me, and how she'd been presenting me to others. I said, You presented my work as your own. She didn't deny it. That was the most chilling part. Instead, she said, I refined it. Lie number 2. I contextualized it, she continued, and frankly, you don't have the presence to sell something like that upstairs. I protected you. Protected me. From success. When I didn't respond, she tilted her head. Are you recording this? No. Good, she said lightly, because I'd hate for you to misunderstand mentorship as exploitation. That word, misunderstand, was her favorite weapon. If I disagreed, I was confused. If I insisted, I was emotional. If I escalated, I was ungrateful. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Look, she said, softening her voice again. If you keep pushing this narrative, it won't end well for you. People already think you're sensitive. Sensitive. Another careful insult. I stood too. My legs felt unreal, like they didn't belong to me. So that's it? I asked. You take the credit and I stay quiet? She met my eyes, unblinking. That's how organizations work. I left her office without saying anything else. My hands were shaking, but my face felt numb. As I walked back to my desk, I realized something terrifying and clarifying at the same time. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was completely calm, because she was certain she'd won. And in that moment, I understood the humiliation wasn't just what she'd already done. It was what she fully intended to keep doing, as long as I let her. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I always thought if something like this happened, if someone so cleanly, so calmly erased me, I'd break down in the bathroom or sob in my car. That's what movies teach us, right? Public humiliation followed by a private collapse. Instead, I felt hollow. I went back to my desk after that meeting and answered emails like a robot. I scheduled follow-ups. I fixed a formatting issue in a spreadsheet that no one would ever thank me for. A colleague stopped by and asked, "Everything okay?" And I smiled automatically and said, "Yeah, just busy." Busy being dismantled. The shock hit first, but it was quiet. It lived under my skin. I kept replaying the conversation with Marianne, hearing her voice in my head. You're taking this personally. Leadership synthesizes. I protected you. Each sentence slid around in my brain, refusing to land cleanly, like my mind was trying to reject them as foreign objects. That night, at home, I sat on the edge of my bed fully dressed for almost an hour. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't eat. I just sat there, staring at the wall, feeling this low-grade nausea that wouldn't go away. Every time I thought about my work, years of effort, late nights, careful choices, I felt embarrassed, like I'd overestimated my place in the world. Anger came next, sharp and sudden. It hit when I opened my laptop and saw an internal post praising Marianne again. Someone had commented, "Incredible vision." Another wrote, "So inspiring to work under this kind of leadership." I slammed the laptop shut so hard my hands hurt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to forward every email, every draft, every timestamp to the entire company. I wanted to walk back into her office and call her what she was: a liar, a thief, a professional parasite who survived by feeding on quieter people. Instead, I sat on the floor and shook. That's the part people don't talk about enough. How humiliation steals your sense of proportion. One minute you're furious. The next you're wondering if maybe she's right. Maybe I am too quiet. Maybe I don't have presence. Maybe I should have fought harder, spoken louder, branded myself better. Maybe this is just how the game is played, and I'm naive for expecting fairness. The sadness followed that thought. Not dramatic sadness. Heavy sadness. The kind that presses on your chest and makes breathing feel like effort. I mourned the version of myself who believed good work would speak for itself. I mourned the trust I'd had in a system that pretended to value collaboration while rewarding appropriation. I also felt ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't seen it sooner. Ashamed that I'd thanked her in the past for support. Ashamed that I'd doubted my own memory before doubting her intentions. The office became unbearable. Every interaction felt loaded. When Marianne walked by my desk without acknowledging me, I felt small. When she suddenly praised me in public for being such a team player, I felt sick. Her kindness felt more humiliating than her cruelty, because now I could see it for what it was: control. One afternoon, I locked myself in a bathroom stall again, not to cry, but to breathe. I counted seconds, in and out. I remember thinking, this is what acceptance must start like. Not peace, not forgiveness, just the understanding that something has happened that you cannot undo. By the end of the week, the anger dulled. The sadness settled into something quieter, a tired clarity. I stopped trying to convince myself that this would fix itself. I stopped imagining apologies that would never come. I accepted the truth, even though it hurt. Marianne wasn't going to give credit back. The organization wasn't going to notice the theft unless it became inconvenient for them. And I had a choice to make. I could keep swallowing it, keep shrinking, keep letting the humiliation rewrite who I was. Or I could decide that this moment, this awful, clarifying moment, wasn't the end of me. That realization didn't feel empowering. Not yet. It just felt honest. People love to imagine that after humiliation comes some big cinematic decision. A resignation letter slammed onto a desk, a dramatic HR complaint, a perfectly worded email that changes everything. I wish I could tell you that's what happened. The truth is messier, quieter, more humiliating in its own way. After that week of emotional whiplash, I didn't quit. I didn't report her. I didn't confront her again. What I did instead was something that surprised even me. I stayed. But I stopped believing. There's a difference. I came in on Monday like usual. Same badge, same desk, same polite nods. But internally, something had shifted. I no longer thought of the office as a place where fairness applied. I started treating it like hostile territory. one where survival depended on observation, not trust. The first thing I did was stop volunteering information. No more, just keeping you in the loop. No more sharing half-formed ideas out loud. I documented everything: dates, times, versions. I emailed myself copies of drafts. I wrote meeting summaries and sent them to multiple people, always framing my language carefully. As discussed, I will continue leading X component. I learned how to assert ownership without sounding defensive. It felt gross, calculated, but necessary. Marianne noticed the change almost immediately. She stopped by my desk more often, suddenly interested in my workload. Once, she said, "You've been very quiet lately. Everything okay?" I smiled and said, "Just focusing." She didn't like that answer. The sudden events started piling up, like the office itself was testing my balance. One morning, my calendar was wiped. Entire meetings removed without explanation. An hour later, they reappeared, rescheduled under her name. Another day, IT claimed a system glitch, deleted a folder containing my earlier drafts. Luckily, I had backups. She didn't know that. Then came the reassignment. Without warning, I was told my role on the project was being streamlined. Translation: downgraded. I was still expected to do the work, but no longer attend executive syncs. When I asked why, Marianne said, "This will free you up to focus on execution, which is your strength." There it was again. That quiet, smiling insult. I went home that night and seriously considered leaving. I updated my resume. I stared at job postings until my eyes burned. The thought of starting over exhausted me, but staying felt like slow self-betrayal. I remember thinking, if I leave now, she wins. Then immediately hating myself for thinking in those terms at all. What finally pushed me toward a decision wasn't a single act of cruelty. It was the accumulation. The way people stopped asking for my opinion. The way my name disappeared from conversations. The way Marianne spoke for me in meetings I wasn't allowed to attend. I realized that if I stayed much longer without a plan, I would start believing her version of me. And that scared me more than unemployment. So I made a quiet decision. I would stop trying to be seen here. I would work on myself outside this system. I took an online certification at night. I reached out, carefully, to former colleagues at other companies. I rebuilt confidence in places Marianne couldn't touch. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself she hadn't managed to steal yet. At the same time, I stayed professional. Impeccable even. No outbursts. No visible resentment. If she wanted to paint me as emotional or unstable, I wasn't going to give her the brush. There was one moment that stands out. During a team meeting, Marianne presented an updated version of the model. Someone asked a technical question she couldn't answer. There was a pause. Brief, but noticeable. All eyes shifted instinctively to me. She answered instead. Incorrectly. I corrected her gently, factually. No edge, just data. The room went silent. She laughed it off, but her jaw tightened. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to control. Not power. Control. That was when I knew my next steps wouldn't be dramatic. They would be strategic. I didn't know yet whether I would leave the company or outlast her. I didn't know if justice would ever be visible or satisfying. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done disappearing for someone else's comfort. And whatever came next, whether escape or endurance, I would decide it on my terms, not hers. I used to think lessons came wrapped in clarity, like something bad happens, you suffer, you reflect, and then, boom, you're wiser, cleaner, stronger. That's not how this worked. What I learned came slowly, unevenly, and mostly through exhaustion. By the time I reached that quiet, strategic version of myself, I was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Not burned out, worn down. The kind of tired that comes from constantly translating yourself so you don't sound difficult, constantly monitoring your tone, your face, your posture, so no one can weaponize them against you. The office didn't explode into justice. There was no sudden reckoning. Marianne didn't get exposed in some dramatic meeting where everyone gasped and apologized to me. If you're waiting for that part, I need to be honest. It didn't happen. And that, in itself, was one of the hardest things to accept. What did happen was quieter and more unsettling. I started noticing how many people knew exactly what she was doing. A colleague once whispered, "I saw your early drafts. I know it was yours." Then did nothing. Another said, "She's like that with everyone," as if pattern excused behavior. Someone else advised me to learn from her, which might be the most devastating sentence I heard that year. That's when it really hit me. Offices don't just enable humiliation, they normalize it. They reward the people who can humiliate cleanly, politely, with plausible deniability. Marianne wasn't an anomaly. She was a product that thrived in the environment we all pretended was neutral. I learned that speaking up isn't always about justice. Sometimes it's about cost. Who pays it, who can afford it, and who pretends not to see it. I learned that documentation matters more than loyalty, and that culture is often just a word used to discourage resistance. Most painfully, I learned something about myself. I learned that I had been equating endurance with integrity, that staying quiet felt virtuous because it avoided conflict, that being agreeable had become part of my identity, not because it served me, but because it kept me safe. Letting go of that self-image hurt. It felt like losing innocence, but there were gains too. I learned how to trust my perception again. That tight feeling in my chest? That wasn't weakness. It was information. I learned that humiliation works best when you internalize it, when you start doing the oppressor's job for them by shrinking yourself. And I learned that acceptance doesn't mean approval. Accepting what happened didn't mean forgiving Marianne or minimizing the damage. It meant stopping the endless loop of if only. If only I'd spoken sooner. If only I'd been louder. If only I'd been different. Acceptance meant recognizing that I was targeted not because I failed, but because I produced something worth taking. If you're reading this because something similar is happening to you, here's the advice I wish someone had given me. Plain, unromantic, and late. Document everything. Don't assume good faith where there's evidence of bad behavior. Pay attention to who benefits from your silence. And never confuse professionalism with self-erasure. You don't owe your dignity to an organization. You don't owe patience to someone who profits from diminishing you. And you are not too sensitive for noticing when credit disappears and power consolidates in one direction. As for me, I'm still here, for now. Still working, still planning, still choosing myself in small, stubborn ways. The humiliation didn't destroy me, but it did strip away illusions I didn't realize I was protecting. I don't know how this story ends yet. Maybe with my exit. Maybe with her fall. Maybe with neither. Real life isn't obligated to provide symmetry. But I know this. I am no longer confused about what happened to me. And that clarity, hard-won, unglamorous, and lonely, is something no one gets to take away. Not again. After months of carefully documenting everything, I started noticing patterns I hadn't seen before. Not just my own humiliation, not just the slow erasure of my work, but inconsistencies in reports, numbers that didn't add up, approvals that seemed fabricated. At first, I tried to ignore it. After all, my fight had been about recognition, not fraud. But the more I looked, the more obvious it became. This was bigger than Marianne taking credit. It started with the expense reports. Small discrepancies at first, reimbursements for meetings that never happened, vendor payments that didn't match invoices, but enough to trigger my curiosity. I wasn't even supposed to have access to some of the files, yet here they were, open on my shared drive. Whoever set it up clearly didn't expect anyone to notice. Then there were the contracts, signed dates that didn't match email threads, amendments that magically appeared in the system without any record of approval. And the cherry on top, Marianne's signature on a few documents I knew I had drafted. It wasn't just theft of ideas anymore, it was deliberate manipulation of the system, and she was covering her tracks in ways that could cost the company millions. I hesitated. I froze. I thought about the risks. If I reported this without proof, or if I made a mistake, I could lose my job. Or worse, be framed for negligence or complicity. Every instinct screamed, stay quiet. But the other part of me, the part that had survived humiliation, betrayal, and the slow gaslighting of the office, said, you can't unsee this. I started gathering evidence methodically. Emails, file histories, timestamps. Every little anomaly became a thread I could follow. And every thread led me closer to Marianne. She wasn't sloppy. She was careful, meticulous, arrogant. She assumed no one would notice, or that if they did, her charm would deflect suspicion. I had to make a choice. Stay silent and preserve my sanity, or go all the way, knowing that this would put me directly in the line of fire. One day, while reviewing a set of files, I found an internal memo labeled Executive Review, Confidential. My heart skipped. The memo explicitly linked Marianne to altered reports sent to the board. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential to finally expose her. I sat back in my chair, trembling. The office seemed suddenly quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights louder than usual. For the first time, I felt something like empowerment, not because I had the evidence, but because I realized I could act, that I wasn't just a passive victim of her theft and lies anymore. And yet, fear wrapped around me like a vice. If I made a wrong move, Marianne wouldn't just humiliate me, she could destroy me professionally, even personally. This was bigger than stolen ideas. This was corruption, and it required careful, calculated courage. I spent nights planning, mapping out the chain of evidence, deciding who to trust, if anyone. Every small success, every discovery, reinforced a single truth. Staying silent was no longer an option. The humiliation had evolved into something else entirely. It was now a test, not of skill or loyalty, but of integrity and bravery. I realized I was no longer fighting for recognition. I was fighting for the truth, and for myself. By the end of that week, I had everything organized. Every altered document, every stolen idea, every lie neatly time-stamped and cross-referenced. Marianne had created a house of cards, and I held the blueprint for its collapse. The question now wasn't if I would act, it was when, and whether I could survive the storm that was coming. After discovering Marianne's manipulations, the office stopped feeling like a workplace and started feeling like a battlefield. Suddenly, every interaction became a test, every email a potential trap. She knew I was gathering evidence. I could feel it. Her glances, the subtle shifts in tone when she spoke to me, the way she assigned tasks with impossibly tight deadlines. The first setup came in the form of a project handover. I was asked to consolidate 3 months of financial data into a report for the board. On paper, it sounded routine, but Marianne had purposefully removed access to several key files and changed naming conventions, so reconciling numbers was nearly impossible. She even emailed me reminders that the board expected the report tomorrow morning. I stayed late that night, cross-referencing documents, checking emails, triple-checking calculations. My hands shook. I knew that one small mistake could be twisted against me as incompetence or carelessness. When I finally submitted it, she skimmed it in front of me, nodded, and said, "Good enough. Try harder next time." Every day after that brought a new form of pressure. She reassigned my tasks last minute, set up meetings that conflicted, and subtly spread doubt about my abilities to colleagues. Whispers started circulating, some encouraged by her, some just opportunistic. "She's stressed. She's floundering. Can't handle this." Every word hit like a calculated cut. The strangest part? The CEO remained distant. I had thought he might notice irregularities, intervene, or at least acknowledge me when I quietly exceeded expectations. But he didn't. Not yet. It felt like he was waiting, silently observing, as if trying to understand if I could endure the system without breaking. One particularly stressful day, she cornered me in the office kitchen. Her tone was sugar-sweet, but sharp. "You know, I could make this easier for you," she said, holding a coffee cup like a weapon. "Or, we could see how far you can actually push yourself. Just depends on what you want." I understood immediately. It wasn't a threat that could be reasoned with. It was a test. One misstep, and she would escalate. One misstep, and all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered could be undermined, twisted, or erased. A few weeks in, the intimidation grew more subtle. Internal audits popped up randomly, colleagues asked loaded questions about my project, and Marianne circulated misleading instructions I had to follow carefully. She even began hinting that certain errors could be career-ending, errors she engineered herself. The office atmosphere became suffocating. I was constantly on edge. Every phone call, every request, every casual remark might be a trap. The humiliation wasn't public anymore. It was psychological. Watching her maneuver, I realized she had perfected the art of invisible assault. She didn't need to shout or humiliate openly. The fear she seeded in my mind was more powerful than any verbal attack. Through it all, the CEO still didn't intervene. Yet, strangely, I felt him observing, assessing. He didn't call me in. He didn't comment. But occasionally, I would catch his gaze across the office, a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. It didn't feel like protection yet, only calculation. That ambiguity, the not knowing if someone in power would support you, was almost worse than Marianne herself. I was utterly alone in navigating the pressure, alone in making every move deliberate, in building a mental armor against humiliation and sabotage. I started keeping a second encrypted log. Every task, every interaction, every veiled threat. It was exhausting, isolating, and terrifying, but I couldn't let my guard down. By the end of that month, I understood the rules of the game: survive, document, and wait. Every setup she created was predictable. Every threat had a pattern. And behind the tension, the CEO's silence felt like a countdown. I realized I was no longer just a target. I was a player in something bigger. Something that would eventually reveal who was truly competent and who was just arrogant behind a polished smile. And that realization, strange as it felt, gave me a quiet kind of strength. After weeks of living under the constant pressure Marianne orchestrated, I thought I understood the rules of the office. I was meticulous, careful, invisible in the right ways, yet assertive enough to preserve my ownership over my work. But I hadn't anticipated him. Him. The CEO, the man whose presence had always been distant, observational, almost untouchable, finally broke that silence. It started with a calendar invite, simply labeled 1.1 Confidential. No explanation. My heart pounded as I walked past Marianne's office that morning. She didn't notice me, or maybe she did, and chose not to react. Either way, I didn't care. I had no idea what to expect. His office was minimalist, almost intimidating, with the city skyline bleeding gray light through the windows. I closed the door quietly behind me. He didn't smile, didn't offer a chair first. He just gestured to one, and I sat, hands folded, trying not to show the storm inside me. "I wanted to speak with you privately," he began, voice calm, controlled, the kind that makes you hang on every word without realizing it. "About the project, and about what's happening in the office." I nodded. My throat felt tight. I, I've been documenting everything," I said carefully. Not to complain, but to make sure I'm accurate. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I know. I've been aware of your work for some time now." My stomach dropped. For weeks, I'd felt alone, targeted, unsure if anyone at the top even saw what Marianne was doing. "You don't need protection," I said immediately, "and I don't want to feel indebted." He studied me silently, as if weighing my words against a hidden scale. Then he said something that surprised me more than anything. "I recognized you the night of the storm." It took me a moment to process. The storm? Then I remembered. The night I had pulled a stranger from the flood, soaked and bleeding, when the city had seemed to collapse. My chest tightened. Could it be him? "You," I began, voice barely above a whisper. "You were there?" He nodded once. "I've seen people in many states of crisis. Some survive by following instinct, some by calculating risk. You saved a life without hesitation, without expectation, without recognition." I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. All my professional frustrations, all my humiliation, seemed suddenly small against the weight of what he'd witnessed. "I waited to see who you truly were in your element here," he continued, "under pressure, under scrutiny, when no one was watching except those who assume power is theirs by default." I could barely breathe. Weeks of intimidation, manipulation, and fear, the setups, the threats, the stolen credit, suddenly had context. He had been observing me, not to rescue me, not yet, but to test if I could endure, if I could act with integrity and precision under the invisible storm Marianne created daily. "I don't want to be anyone's favorite," I said quietly. "I just want to do my work, without being manipulated or erased." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And you won't be. But the system you're in, it has masks. People pretend to be something they're not. Some succeed, some fail. You've shown me who you are, and that clarity, your clarity, cannot be ignored." We sat in silence for a long moment. I realized the pressure, the setups, Marianne's arrogance, all of it, hadn't been random. It had been a test in disguise. And now, finally, the truth of it was laid bare. I left that office with a strange combination of relief and determination. Relief that someone saw the reality of my experience. Determination because now I knew I had an ally. Indirect, cautious perhaps, but an ally who recognized both my work and my resilience. And for the first time in months, I felt the possibility that I could move forward not just as a victim of humiliation, but as someone who could survive it, and ultimately, expose it. By the time I submitted the evidence, I wasn't nervous anymore. I was calculated. Every document, every email chain, every draft time-stamped and cross-referenced was ready. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, triple-checking for errors or loopholes Marianne could exploit. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About clearing the air and making sure what she had done could no longer be hidden behind smiles and office politics. I requested a confidential meeting with the board. HR had already been looped in as a neutral party, though I knew their influence was limited. Marianne was unaware of the timing, though she had begun to suspect. Her subtle glances and overly casual comments over the past few days hinted that she knew the walls were closing in. As I walked into the boardroom, my hands were steady. My pulse raced, but not with fear. I placed the thick folder on the table and looked up at Marianne, who had been seated confidently at the head of the table. She smiled, as though expecting me to falter. I didn't. "I've submitted a report," I began. "It details irregularities in project management, financial documents, and internal communications. I've cross-checked everything, and all evidence is attached." The room was silent. Marianne shifted uncomfortably, scanning the documents. At first, she tried the classic tactic: smile, downplay, charm. "This is very thorough, but perhaps some points are misinterpreted. I think the context may explain," I interrupted, calmly, factually. "All documentation is time-stamped. Emails confirm approvals, drafts confirm ownership. Any alteration of documents or claims of authorship without acknowledgement can be verified independently." The board members began leafing through the folder. I could feel Marianne's confidence slipping with every page they read, a subtle tightening of her jaw. A flicker of panic in her eyes she tried to hide behind polite nods. One by one, questions were asked. Technical clarifications, dates, approval chains. Each answer I gave was precise, verifiable. No emotion, no embellishment. Just facts. Finally, the CFO leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Marianne, can you explain these discrepancies?" Her smile faltered. "Well, there might be some miscommunication. I intended to." "And these emails?" I interjected. "Sent under your name but drafted by me weeks before?" There was a pause. She opened her mouth, closed it, and finally said nothing. Not because she had no words, but because the words would confirm her guilt. The tension in the room was palpable. Colleagues who had avoided me all year were now witnessing the truth. The arrogance that had shielded her for months crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. By the end of the hour, the board had made its decision. Marianne was removed from all project oversight immediately, her access to sensitive documents revoked, and her performance flagged for formal investigation. In a private note from HR, she was told that any attempts to undermine others further would result in termination. Publicly, she maintained composure, but I saw it. Her humiliation was sharp, undeniable, and deserved. Afterward, as I collected my things, a few colleagues stopped me. Some whispered congratulations, some awkwardly tried to justify their previous inaction. I didn't care. I felt an odd mixture of relief and fatigue, like surviving a long storm. The office atmosphere shifted overnight. Meetings that had previously excluded me now sought my input. People spoke with caution rather than arrogance when Marianne was present. But the real victory wasn't in their changed behavior, it was in reclaiming my own agency. For the first time since the slow humiliation began, I felt like myself again. That evening, I returned home, exhausted. The rain tapped lightly against the window. I poured a glass of wine and stared out at the dark city streets. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I felt steady, clear, resolved. I had endured, documented, and acted. The storm of humiliation was over, not because it had been erased, but because I had survived it and emerged intact. And in that quiet, I realized something vital. I hadn't fought for recognition alone. I had fought to prove to myself that I mattered, that integrity was worth maintaining, and that no one could rewrite my reality without my consent. The storm had passed. The air felt different, clean, heavy with possibility. The office felt different. Not perfect, not entirely safe, but different. The storm had passed. Marianne's shadow no longer loomed over my work, no longer twisted every contribution into a showcase of her ego. The board had made its decision, HR had done its minimal paperwork, and the subtle shifts in colleagues' behavior confirmed one undeniable truth. I had survived. And yet, survival wasn't enough. I had a choice. walk away, leave with a neatly packaged severance and a story of triumph, or stay and rebuild my place on my own terms. I spent days considering it. The first instinct was to run. Who wouldn't want to leave behind months of humiliation, sabotage, and tension? But leaving felt hollow. Leaving would be letting the story end with someone else's version of events. I didn't want that. I stayed. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, not for him. The CEO who had silently observed and finally acknowledged me. I stayed for me. For the work I loved, the projects that challenged me, and the knowledge that I could navigate even the most toxic environments and emerge intact. Staying was a declaration. I would define my own role, my own value, and my own boundaries. The first few weeks were a careful dance. I reclaimed meetings, reasserted authorship of my projects, and rebuilt trust with colleagues without arrogance, without aggression, just steady professionalism. The whispers about favoritism faded once people realized my competence was independent, deliberate, and unassailable. I was no one's favorite. I was myself. Marianne was still around, still present in the office, but she no longer had power over me. The smile that once disarmed me now felt hollow when directed at me. I responded with calm, factual communication, never letting emotion give her leverage. Watching her realize she could no longer manipulate me was quietly satisfying, though I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Her defeat was already visible in her own frustration, in the careful way she measured every word and gesture. The CEO never explained why he had remained distant for so long. I didn't ask. There was no need. The experience had taught me more than any explanation could. I had learned the weight of observation, patience, and strategy. I had learned that endurance wasn't passive, that visibility without compromise was possible, and that power can exist quietly, through competence and integrity rather than arrogance. Rain tapped against the office windows that afternoon, a soft echo of the storm that had started it all months ago. I watched it for a long moment, thinking about the night I had pulled a stranger from the flood, thinking about the weeks of subtle humiliation, the pressure, the setups, and the quiet courage it had taken to persist. I smiled faintly to myself. The storm outside had passed, and the storm inside me had calmed. I was no longer defined by others' arrogance or manipulation. I was defined by my actions, my resilience, and my refusal to be erased. I stayed, not for anyone, not for the company, not for recognition, but for the certainty that I could survive, endure, and thrive on my own terms. The office was quiet. The rain fell gently, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace. I stayed, because now I always would.